This is why you should always trust your instincts. In the 1970s, a young man was studying at a college in Chicago, and after one of his classes, he decided to hitchhike home. A man in a car offered him a ride, and he seemed pretty nice and friendly, so the young man got in the car. But things escalated quickly. The man suddenly took a completely different route, and when the young man told him, "You're going the wrong way," he said, "You're coming with me." The young man froze. This was fight or flight. He stayed calm at first and waited. Then, when the car slowed down in traffic, he quickly opened the passenger door and jumped out of the vehicle. Then he ran as fast as he could and he didn't look back. A few years later, this young man was watching TV when something made his blood run cold. There was a photo of the man who picked him up on the news. He had been arrested for the murder of at least 33 boys and young men. And when the interviewer asked him why his car didn't have a door handle, he said that's how his first victim escaped, and he would never make the same mistake again. That was when the young man realized he had escaped from the famous serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Have you ever felt like you're being watched but didn't know why? For at least this feeling would lead to a terrifying discovery. She had just gone through a really messy breakup and had to move out. She found a studio apartment on the other side of town, but when she got there, she saw a bunch of things were left behind, including books, clothes, and a long mirror propped up against the wall in front of the bed. But when she called the landlord, he said that the previous renter didn't want them anymore, so at least put everything in a bag to deal with later. She decided to keep the mirror though. She went to bed that night and woke up to soft rustling noises. She began to feel uneasy. She looked around and swore that she saw a long shadow move across her room. But maybe it was just the trees. She tried to ignore it, but all through the night she felt a pair of eyes on her. The next day she convinced herself she must have just been feeling anxious because it was her first night living alone. But she went to bed again and couldn't sleep. She heard the same rustling noises, opened her eyes and saw a long shadow was now standing in front of her bed. She turned away for a second to turn the light on, but stumbled, and before she knew it, the shadow was gone. When she woke up, she took the bag of the previous renter's things and decided she didn't want the mirror either. She pushed it out of the way and found behind it was a huge hole that someone had dug to get to her. This is why you should never answer a call from your own number. Tim was woken up by his phone constantly ringing, but he ignored it and went back to sleep. That day he went to work, pulled out his phone, and saw that he had a missed call from his own number. He thought this must be a coincidence. He went to hang out with his friend and another call came. This time he picked up and heard his own voice repeating whatever he'd say back to him, until he was about to hang up. The voice said, "You're going downhill." He felt very uneasy but tried to let it go. The next morning at work, his number called again, but this time he felt terrified. So he made up an excuse and drove home as fast as he could. He knew deep inside some kind of a confrontation was coming. As soon as he got home, he saw his car pull into the driveway, and he saw himself get out of the car with a terrifying smile on his face. His doppelganger had stalked him and found him. Tim barricaded himself in his bedroom, but his doppelganger was banging on the door. He knew he was almost out of time. That's when he had one last idea. He pulled out his phone and called himself, and he heard his own voice reply, "How are you calling me from this number? Who are you?" This story is the reason why I'll never live alone. Once there was an elderly woman who lived alone in a cabin in the mountains. She lived a quiet life and rarely had visitors. Her husband had passed away recently, so her only companion was her beloved dog. Every night when the woman went to bed, the dog would lick her hand as a way to let her know that he was always there to protect her. But one night the woman was woken up to the sound of her dog whimpering, so she reached her hand below her bed and the dog licked her hand as always. She thought the dog must just be cold, so she didn't think that much of it. In the morning, she stuck her hand out again, but the dog wasn't there anymore. She thought he must be up already and was just wandering around the house, but what she'd find later would terrify her. She heard dripping noises, so she went to the bathroom to see if it was a sink, but it wasn't. Instead, she saw her loving companion hung up by the bathtub, and on the bathroom mirror were the words written in blood, "Humans can lick too." Do you know someone who had a crush that went too far? Jason only loved two things, butterflies and Angie. He wanted to ask her out for ages, but never had the courage to. He was always kind of a strange kid, with his obsession with butterflies and all. All his school supplies in his room were all decorated with butterflies. People at school didn't know much about him except that. Some rumors flew around every once in a while though. Some people even said that his mother had gifted him a butterfly resin before she passed away. Angie, however, never made fun of him. In fact, when Jason asked her on Halloween weekend if he could drive her to a costume party together, she thought it was charming, but things took a dark turn quickly. At first, the car ride was awkward, but not anything to be worried about. Then Angie looked at her phone and saw that they passed the address of the party. She said, "Hey, you're going the wrong way," but there was only a grin on Jason's face. The next day, police found both Angie and Jason. Jason was lying on the ground, cold, but above him, Angie was strung up on the ceiling, with two large pieces cut out from her back and opened up to look like wings. This is why I don't tell anyone where I live. There was once a boy who asked his single father for a bedtime story, so the father told him. There was once a boy named Colby who made friends with another boy online called Helper23. On Colby's birthday, Helper23 wanted to give him a present in real life, so Colby gave him his home address, where he lives with his mom, his dad, and his little brother. But then Colby started to feel a bit weird about giving his address to a stranger online. The next night, he thought he had to tell his parents about it. He called out to his dad but got no reply, then found both his parents killed and a man wearing a dark hoodie holding a knife in the hallway. As Colby started to beg for his life, he hears his little brother crying in the next room. The intruder then strangles Colby and leaves the house with Colby's baby brother. The boy then looks up at his father and asks, "Why did the intruder take the baby?" To which his father just calmly smiled and said, "I've always wanted to be a father." This is why you should never knock on a stranger's door. Once there was a man trying to check into a hotel. The woman at the front desk gave him his key and told him none of the guests are allowed to go into the room across the hall. He agreed, but as he continued to stay in the hotel, he grew more and more curious about the room he wasn't supposed to go in. At one point, he even walked down the hall to that room and tried the door. It was locked. Then he bent down and looked through the keyhole. He saw that it was just the same as his hotel room. But in the corner of the room, there was a woman whose skin was extremely pale, almost a sickly white. Her back was to the wall, so the man didn't see what she looked like. He almost knocked on the door, but then just decided to leave her alone. The next day, he walked past the door again and decided to look into the keyhole. This time, there was no hotel room and no woman. It was all just red. He thought that this seemed really strange, so he went to the front desk and asked about the room. After insisting on an answer, the woman at the front desk told him, "A long time ago, a man killed his wife in that room, and her ghost is still there. But these ghosts are not what you might imagine. They're completely white all over, except for their eyes, which are red." How far would you go to make a wish come true? For one boy, his wish would cause him to do the unthinkable. At first, this boy had a normal life. He lived with his parents in a small town, and every time he lost a tooth, his parents would tell him about the tooth fairy. They said that he could bury his tooth and make a wish, and that wish would come true. Until one day, a tragedy that would change his life forever happened. His parents were in a car crash, and he was the only one who made it out. By this time, he had no more teeth left to give to the tooth fairy. So this boy went into his father's tool shed, took a hammer, and knocked out all of his teeth one by one. He was sent to a mental hospital after that, but after a few years was released. It seems like everyone in town had forgotten about the tragedy of his family until a series of home invasions were reported. Nothing was ever taken in these home invasions except the parents would find their children in their beds, crying with their teeth knocked out. When they found this pattern, the police went to the boy's home and found it abandoned. But in the backyard, they found over 1,000 small teeth buried. It's rumored that this man is still out there somewhere looking for his next victim.